Hey everybody, welcome on in. It's Thursday, it's noon,
It's caucus time.
and we've got a great episode lined up today. I'm really excited about it. I always love bringing in guests. It's an
Yep.
exciting conversation. Technology, though, just, all of a sudden makes it a much more exciting proposition to get
hmm
through. But folks, we're here for you. That's why we do this, because all the excitement is worth it for the big discussions we've got. So we won't waste time with banter today. We'll just get to it. First of all, thank you to our wonderful sponsor, T-Rex Inc. Don't forget, you head on over there, caucus30 at trexinc.com. You get all of the God Family Country swag, apparel, mugs. He's got hats now. I have an order that I need to place. My budget just tells me to wait, but I have a big order I'd like to place.
But
So
you have that discount code, so
we have the big discount code
it
too.
fits in the budget better.
The biggest discount code that will supersede all of the other discount codes. Go on over, say thank you for supporting Unauthorized Caucus. We like them so much. They're great. In fact, we need to talk to him about doing a special viewing of Am I Racist once
Yeah.
it comes out. I think that'd be a fun time. So we've got some stuff in the works with them. But today we've got a guest.
Yes.
We've had one guest for you all before, and just each other we don't count as guests. So we do this every week, but it gets more exciting every once in a while. Mr. Auron MacIntyre is on with us. He is a voice you may have heard, a face you may have seen. Not only is he a host with The Blaze, he calls himself a YouTuber and recovering journalist. But there is a lot of neat stuff, a columnist and author of The Total State, and we are very glad for him to join the conversation with us today. Auron, how are you doing? Thank you for being here.
Doing well, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, this year, as we've kind of talked through, of course, with both of our backgrounds here, working at Phyllis Schlafly Eagles, looking across the spectrum of all of the political goings on, but in the real historic nature of how it all fits together, we've kind of just gone deeper and deeper and deeper into this move, into where are we in this historical timeline, and what do we as conservatives, if we even call ourselves that anymore, what is it that we're looking at? So your work came across our screens, and the Total State, and a lot of what you're doing on Substack, and doing
And
with your show,
X.com.
and on X,
Yeah.
and it really lined up and kind of brought us to this. Okay, here's a guy to have a conversation with about authoritarianism and tyranny, and how those, I think so many people think of them as the same thing, and we've started kind of pulling them apart and realizing this is a much bigger topic
hmm
to dive into. So you're the person we thought of, and I'm glad you could spend some time with us today.
hmm
I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, my main hope with the book was really to explain to people that ultimately democracy is not some magical defense against tyranny, and that there are many ways tyranny can arrive. So just because we are living in what many people still assume to be a representative republic doesn't mean that we're automatically guarded from the many things that the state can do to oppress individuals, families, communities, churches, and that kind of thing.
Absolutely. I think I mean, the biggest thing for me is I hear this conversation, I think, is important to separate for folks who want to be thinkers before voters, and even before activists, is Donald Trump. The big, oh, he's going to be an authoritarian. And I thought, yeah, but you people are already tyrants. I kind of want an authoritarian maybe to come in and clean house, but then that gets dicey to start talking about and
hmm
saying. So that's where I think a lot of people are arriving at this. Hold on, what is up with this guy down in El Salvador, and how would Donald Trump actually behave? And maybe I want him to. So I've talked a lot, Mason. What you looking at me?
Yeah, I mean, something I wrestle with a lot is like there's the horseshoe theory of left and right, which I think that's BS. But then there's the horseshoe theory of authoritarianism and libertarianism. Because you look at the writings of people like Curtis Yarvin and Nick Land, and it's like, oh, if we take libertarianism to its absolute limits, it kind of also looks like absolute government. And you write about Yarvin in your book, and I believe I've heard you talk about Nick Land in other places. But I I think Bukele is also kind of emblematic of that, where he's like, okay, we're going to expand the power of the state. We're going to restore law and order, and like through these authoritarian measures, we are going to, create a life that's worth living in this country. We're going to improve the standard of living, which allows people to exercise their liberty and their freedom, by way of authoritarianism. So, what are your thoughts on the relationship between, liberty and authoritarianism, and like how they kind of work together in some instances?
Well, Peter Thiel famously said that he doesn't believe that democracy and freedom are compatible anymore. And he's in good company with that. There are many ancient thinkers who believed very much the same thing. Democracy, particularly Athenian democracy, the type that we like to hold up and the type we have now isn't even approaching that. But even that form of democracy was understood through Athenian history as really not the best time, really not the greatest time in Athenian history. The trick really is this understanding. We have this axis we like to understand things along, which is just like there's more government power and there's less government power. And the less government power there is, the more freedom, the more government power there is, the less freedom there is. There is some truth to that. Ultimately, you don't want the state dictating everything. You don't actually want a total state. You don't want a state that is reaching into every aspect of your society and dictating every moment of your life. However, the thing that a lot of people on the right, conservatives, libertarians, the mistake they make is they believe that the way that you avoid that is by spreading the government out across these different organizations. You create a scenario in which there's no decisive action ever taken. And what we've seen is that passing this buck, distributing this power across the entire executive branch into all of these organizations that actually have no duty to the voter, are never held accountable for what they do. The executive themselves doesn't actually have any direct power over them. That has not reduced tyranny. That has actually not reduced a government power. That has only increased a government power. In many ways, for Donald Trump to come in and slash the government, to come in and remove the authority of the experts, remove the authority of the bureaucrats, remove the authority of these giant bureaucratic organizations, he would have to act in a way that many people would think of as authoritarian. Now, it wouldn't really be authoritarian. It would just be him actually acting as a president who is actually in charge of the executive branch, the one that the founding fathers actually designed. But we are so far away from what the founding fathers designed that would seem authoritarian to most people, because what we see in kind of the post-war consensus is that decisive action is the problem, and that slow, deliberate nudging by large bureaucratic organizations is the answer. But what we're finding is actually bureaucratic organizations, that all we have to think of is something like 2020 and the pandemic to understand that they are not actually reducing any of the authoritarianism. They are very good at increasing the tyranny. At the same time, having a guy who would be able to cancel them, would be able to fire them, would be able to actually control the executive branch again, might look more decisive, and in that sense, people might feel it to be more authoritarian. But ultimately, it would actually increase the liberty of the people in the United States.
Yeah, that reminds me of what Sam Francis says, anarcho-tyranny, of like, okay, we're going to have, it's like the DMV-ification of everything. We're going to have a large government, but it's going to be very weak, and it's going to get involved with everything you do. You're going to have to jump through all these hoops, get all these certifications for literally everything. I mean, it's worse in the UK with like TV licenses. But I feel like that's kind of the logic of it, which is Haywood says, we need a government of limited ends but unlimited means. It's people conflate small government versus weak government, and like big government versus strong government. I think it's better to have a small and strong government than a big and weak government.
Yeah, a narrow government with the power to do the job correctly is far better than a broad government that is weak across the board, requires consensus, requires this constant bureaucratic management, but ultimately cannot solve any of the problems. And that's really what we've run into on a regular basis. The problem again, though, however, is the overall centralization. What we have gone through the many years of the United States existence is a slow centralization of power over time. We often came up with rationales for why that was okay. There were emergencies, there were other things happening, and we just had to do it. But slowly and surely, we have eroded the protections that were created in the Constitution, ironically, while increasing the amount of democracy that was not intended to be in the Constitution. Those things are not separated. Those things exist simultaneously for a reason. Democracy does not actually reduce the government. It actually facilitates the expansion of government. And we can see this by the legitimating ideology of popular sovereignty across so many states that have exploded in size over the last few hundred years. This isn't the only thing, of course. There are many states throughout history who have found other reasons to centralize and expand. But the thing we need to understand, the thing that conservatives have to grasp, is that the idea of democracy itself is not enough to limit the government. It is not enough to create a virtuous government. It is the virtue of the people that the Constitution was ultimately trying to kind of put into practice there. It was the traditions and folkways and way of being that already existed in a people who were rigorously involved in civic life, creating voluntary institutions that allowed them to have these intermediate steps between them and the final government that enabled the self government so many people think of. And while we might hope ultimately that spreading that power out might solve that problem, what we see is actually it allows a situation in which, as long as we open every one of these processes up to mass democracy, they are easily manipulated by the kind of oligarchic class that wields the power of informational institutions like the media and universities.
And see, this is, I mean, this is a really where I think a lot of folks are opening up, the idea. I know that it's been cliche for a long time. Conservatives often, we're a republic, not a democracy, and this line has been very prevalent. But I think people are just now starting to really understand. Wait a minute, what do all of these things actually mean? At least that's what I'm seeing in my own life as people around me are starting to realize. Well, wait a minute. We aren't a democracy, we are a republic, but also I've been instituting all of these false ideas about limited government and powerless government and the popular sovereignty across different states, and it's making an interesting turn. So here's my question, on a historical note. At this point, we're talking about behaving inside the Constitution when the fact is our enemy, the administrative state, no longer does. They haven't for some time. When do you think that shift happened? That we really just they moved extra constitutional. Was that something that had to do with the 20th century, or did we see pieces beyond it? I'm just curious for the understanding of everyone when you think that shift started to happen.
Yeah, people will have a couple different possible start dates. There's the late 1890s where you end up with the name has escaped me of the act, but where they basically get rid of the spoil system and ensure that there has to be this theoretically neutral bureaucratic installation into the government apparatus. Though, of course, if you paid any attention, you know that really there is no neutral understanding of this. A lot of people will also point to Woodrow Wilson, who is a big force in kind of bringing the academic nature, the idea that experts should rule instead of statesmen. We don't need statesmen anywhere. We don't need discernment, wisdom, prudence. What we need is experts. What we need is academic specification into these different areas. But of course, the big culprit, a lot of people I think correctly point to, I think the one that really founds this ultimately is FDR. James Burnham wrote The Managerial Revolution. And his entire point in The Managerial Revolution is that while most people think of the 1930s as a time where three big government ideas ruled, you had the fascists, and then you had the communists, and then you had liberal democracies. But he said ultimately what we were seeing in all three instances was simply different flavors of managerialism. This idea that mass consumption and mass production had required the creation of mass bureaucratic institutions to centralize and manage these economies, these militaries, and everything about a nation. And so while the communists, the fascists failed first, obviously, and then the communists failed in the 80s, the kind of the final, and this was considered the end of history, the last man standing in the managerial game was liberal democracy. And this is why I think we see so many people arguing, oh, the government is fascist. Oh, no, the government is communist. Well, no, the government is managerial, and you just don't understand that this is the same behavior, this is the same problem iterated over all of these modernistic governments. So I think that really is the issue that most people are identifying. It's a process that started with, again, maybe Wilson or FDR, but has followed us all the way into 2024.
Yeah, and that's the key is now though. So this has happened. What's our response? Which, I mean, I don't mean to, I'm not trying to hop the conversation further here, but this is where I think a lot of people start turning in an interesting fashion to seeing what El Salvador's Bukele is doing, and kind of looking and saying, okay, not just what do I want Donald Trump to do, but down the board, my congressmen, senators, people who were electing, how do I want them to behave? And this is where I think voices like Josh Hawley, at least I'm seeing in the little conservative activist world, because this is what we, around the Phyllis Schlafly group, this is the biggie: is grassroots conservative activists working in their state. The voices of like a Josh Hawley are starting to get much more profound and much more amplified, because they're hearing this Christian nationalist, virtue based. This is the direction we must go. None of this just limited government nonsense. It's virtuous people, virtuous government, not just limited and neutral. That actually doesn't work. It just ends up running down the road to tyranny. So I want, I wonder what Well, I lost my point somewhere in there, but I was going to say I wonder what the goal is for us to look for in new leaders. What kind of questions we should be asking them when it comes to these things, because you can't always just have a serious, historical and philosophical conversation with people. What's our short version to getting some of the leaders who are asking for office to understand what we're looking for now, what we need to do, and which direction we need to go?
Well, like you said, we're seeing guys like Holly regularly have these kind of conversations, which is very promising. Now, Holly has a very different definition of Christian nationalism than, say, somebody like Stephen Wolfe, who wrote, of course, the book that most people would refer to when they're trying to understand Christian nationalism. So that can be a slippery term, and that's one of my problems with it. But ultimately, I do agree with a lot of the aims, which, as you say, is
Mhm.
understanding that government can only be limited when the people are virtuous. That's what the founding fathers told us themselves, that the Constitution
Yeah.
was for a virtuous people who are following a biblical truth, not for just anybody. The Constitution doesn't just work for any population. This is also what I talk about with the work of someone like Joseph de Maistre, who pointed out that any constitution is ultimately only the inculcation of virtues that exist already in the people. It is simply formalizing them and passing them on to the next generation. If the values are not practiced, if the people are not virtuous, then the things written down on the paper, no matter how beautiful the technical architecture of the government may be, are not really a solution. And this is really the problem with with systems based solutions. A lot of guys I respect, like Curtis Yarvin, are thinking in the realm of system based solutions. And I do think there are, of course, faults in our system, but ultimately the problem is one of a spiritual dearth. It's a dearth of virtue. It's a dearth of the cultivation of the very things that allow for individual government to flourish. Machiavelli is often remembered as somebody who gave advice to the prince, to a monarch, but Machiavelli was actually a big fan of republican government. He wrote two other books that talk about how he prefers republican government to a monarchy. And what he says in those books is that a republic requires virtuous citizens. That ultimately it's the virtue of the citizens that allows for them to have a republic instead of a monarchy. And if that fades, then it will not flourish. One of the things he points to is that republican governments cannot be imperial. That ultimately an imperial government that is republican will find itself slowly drifting towards other loyalties, other desires, because republican governments and virtuous civilizations require them to be able to interact with each other. They cannot grow, they cannot expand infinitely. This is not a government that scales. So, Republican government might have been good for a virtuous people who were occupying 13 separate states during the beginning of the country. But when you try to scale it to 50 states, a colony spanning empire, and then to an international empire that's just trying to manage basically the whole world, its economy, and its infrastructure, you end up with a government that can no longer remain Republican. And that is the problem. We no longer have a republic because we exchanged it for the infrastructure necessary to operate a global empire.
So, do you think the era of us being a republic is dead, and something else is needed in its place, or is that something we could actually work our way back to? I mean, obviously, there's a lot of factors in getting there, but is it just dead and off the table, or is that a possibility still?
I think that if you want to continue to operate the empire, it's dead. America is going to have to make a decision. Does it want to be a nation? Does it want to be a people? Does it want to be a republic, possibly founded in the same way that it was originally? Or does it want to continue to be the global hegemon? It can't be both. Now, that's scary because global hegemony is something that we factor in to our understanding. We don't want a multipolar world. We defeated communism and became basically the only superpower. And people are right to point out that if America is not asserting its will everywhere, and that means some things that are not in America's interest could occur somewhere else. That things that we don't like, human rights violations, other things that people get very skittish about, could occur elsewhere. That's true. If America is not playing world police, then things that we don't like could happen around the globe. But if we demand continuously for that we have these infinite wars, that we have infinite expansion of our sphere of control into everywhere, NATO can expand forever, the American empire can expand forever. If that is our insistence, then I think it's pretty impossible to return to anything approaching what the founding fathers promised us. I think it's very likely that ultimately we're going to have to go through a lot of difficulties deciding who we want to be as a people, if we can even make that decision. And that's going to have to force us to change the way that we understand our role in the world.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Going back to one of our last questions, kind of the idea of a virtuous people and Christian nationalism, and in that vein, um, it was making me think about how like you really can't have a neutral government. You really can't have a neutral system. Like I think it's some aspect of human psychology that necessitates a religious or mythic understanding of the world. You know, we need our founding myths. We need our religious faiths. And like if you take Christianity out of the picture, something else comes and replaces it. And Nick Land talks about, like democracy has become the new civic religion, like and it's you know and we have these like democratic rituals essentially, and everything we do around the elections, and it's invoked as like a deity, over and over again by the left. You see it on Twitter, like, oh, we have to protect our democracy, and it's like
It's
that,
our
that doesn't
sacred
really.
democracy, right?
Yeah, it's a sacred democracy that doesn't really mean anything. It, well, but it means something religious. It means it's an article of faith, and this connects to something Ryan and I were discussing before we started the live stream today. We were kind of quibbling back and forth about Carl Schmitt and the state of exception. And Schmitt wrote Political Theology, kind of describing how concepts in politics are secularized theological concepts. And you write about Schmitt in your book as well. I have part of it opened up right here, where you say that the state mirrors the role of the metaphysical deity. And you also talk about how the state of exception is you compare it to the idea of the miracle, and Schmitt does that as well. That's what Schmitt says. Sovereign is he who decides the state of exception. So, um, and I've kind of packed a lot in here, but we did want to talk to you about the state of exception because we were arguing about this beforehand. Not really arguing, but trying to like understand. Who is the sovereign? Who decides the state of exception? Because during COVID, it seemed like it was the CDC was the sovereign. It could suspend all norms and put in place a state of exception. But and this is something I've wrestled with for the last 4 years since that happened. Like, who is the sovereign? Because then it seemed like they were the sovereign, but I don't think they could do that right now. Um, so are there different nexuses of sovereignty within the state? Does it shift from one to another? And it's like a therapy where somebody has like the talking baton. That's how the government works. Somebody gets the sovereignty baton. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's actually not a terrible way to understand that. When you have what what we have been trained to kind of fear is monarchical power. You guys were hitting on this earlier, right? Autocracy is the worst thing that we can imagine. We rarely think about how power behaves in an oligarchy, right? Because we live in one, so we don't want to think too much about that. That's really important for the ruling class that we not really think about what oligarchy means. Oligarchy means that power is just distributed across a network of a few people. In our situation, it's across a couple of nodes of prestige, right? So we have academia, we have these scientific organizations, we have these unelected bureaucrats, and in each one of these areas, there's specific expertise. And we say the experts get to be sovereign when that moment comes. So when there's a pandemic, the CDC becomes sovereign. And when the economy is a problem, the economists become sovereign. And when there's a war on, then the DOD becomes sovereign, right? But each one of these is sovereign only in these little specific areas. And what you have is this constant battle over, they're working together in a sense that there is this ruling structure and that they do have similar incentives. There is a ruling class with a unified understanding of certain incentives that drive them towards certain behaviors. But they're also fighting for their own territory, right? And we can see this on a regular basis where, say, maybe the squad right now is squabbling with some of the legacy parts of the Democratic Party over whether or not you should be supporting Israel, right? Because this has become a big fault line across, especially the left. And so there's this constant battle between these different factions. So you are right that there are these moments where, if depending on the disaster that has come upon us, there's a certain state of exception that you get to invoke, and in that moment, that portion of the oligarchy is sovereign. But the key thing is it is still distributed. A lot of people want us to point to one person or like a ruling council that is steepling their fingers and has a cool insignia that they pledge allegiance to or something in an occult ritual. That's not how it works. What happens is there's again, we have these several different nodes of which power is spread across. And then, as you point out, whenever that specific instance where that node of power is the expert comes up, they ascend into that sovereignty. Still, however, tending to drive towards the interests of the larger oligarchy. You'll notice that when, say, Anthony Fauci suddenly seemed to become president of the United States, all of his decisions still lined up with the left, right? They were still benefiting the donors of the left. They were still crushing the middle of America that tends to vote Republican. So it's not like he became sovereign and suddenly he threw all of the interests of the rest of the oligarchy out the window. He was still subject to those interests, but he was the one in the driver's seat at the moment.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you were going on something else.
Oh no, that answers my question.
And let me ask another question and zip back. We're just going to continue to leapfrog because as I process, we're going back now. So here's a question too, and this is one, whether it's across the folks that we're talking to here at the Phyllis Schlafly offices, if it's the the radio station I'm involved in, if it's everywhere that I talk to conservatives, one of the big problems we have now is language. No one knows the right definitions or the right phrases or labels. Conservative doesn't mean the same thing to everyone anymore. Christian nationalism, you just even brought that up. There's different things that different mean. How do we overcome without just having to have a long form conversation? Do you think there's any way forward for us to be able to start getting people to pay attention to this? Because my gosh, has TikTok destroyed everyone's brain? You can't hardly, have a conversation in any kind of length. What kind of labels do we need to coalesce around or redefine? What kind of movement is there to understand what do you mean by what you are and what you're seeking for America? This is one of the biggest things that plagues me, because the whole point is I'm not here to always have big, thoughtful, deep conversations with someone who knows what I mean. I'm out there trying to talk to people, as we all are, to get them all to understand, to get a lot of voters, a lot of Americans in this mindset. But it's hard to figure out how to do that without just having to define and couch my terms at each point. What do we do about that? Is there a way to redefine and coalesce around that? Is there kind of a growing group? I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? I'm curious.
Yeah, this is a really difficult problem. I'm glad you brought it up because few people recognize kind of the depth of this problem. The conservative movement is a mess. There's a lot of people pulling in a lot of different directions. And because so much of the conservative movement was allowed to become radically artificial, I'm sure you guys have heard the term conservatism Inc. for a long time. Because so much of that was allowed to be pulled apart and used for specific fundraising purposes or wielding of power, getting certain people elected, it means that there's not really an organic meaning to what people talk about when they mean conserving. Usually when you conserve something, you mean bring the traditions of the past, bring the folk ways, that way of being again of the people forward into the future. That's what you're conserving. However, for a lot of conservatives, they don't like a lot of American history. They're actually huge fans of many of the radical changes that have occurred to the Constitution, to the United States in general over a long time. I mean, you just look at, many libertarians were open border. Many neoconservatives were interested in constant foreign adventurism. Many people say, oh, well, conservatism is just about freedom. And so that means, if you want to purchase children as a couple of, gay guys, that's fine. That's not a problem. Well, what does that mean? How can you be the party of family values? How can you be the movement of conservatism, but also hold to some of those ideas? The problem is you really can't. But that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make this big tent. And before you can conserve anything, you have to ask, who are we? What are we trying to conserve? What does that mean? And the answer across the conservative movement seems to be, we don't know. And that's a huge issue. So, you have these different factions that you just talk about. You have like kind of this libertarian, I left the left didn't leave me, or I didn't leave the left me types. These guys who are just trying to get as many of the disaffected liberals into the tent as possible. You have Christian nationalism. You have guys talking about Catholic integralism. You have all of these different kind of niche areas where people are trying to draw a crowd. Ultimately, in situations like this, what you often see, whether people like it or not, is a Caesar, is somebody who comes in and says, I am uniting, I am forging this alliance, right? Rather than following a specific ideology, you're following a specific person. Now that terrifies people, understandably so. There are a lot of Caesars who have been bad. This is not some there's not a universally good thing. Stalin was a Caesar, no matter how you feel about that fact. He stopped the revolution. He fixed the problem of communism for the moment. He did it in the worst and most horrific way possible, but he did it. So that this is not some universal solution that always comes out to a good end, but it is historically true that when we're in this moment, what generally happens is people coalesce around leadership rather than ideology. And that's why people coalesce around someone like Donald Trump. A lot of people have problems understanding the appeal of Trump and what's happening to Trump. I think a lot of people recognize that he is largely unworthy of the loyalty that he has. I'm one of the people who I think that's the case. But ultimately, I can recognize the reality of the historical cycle we're in, and whether Donald Trump is the guy or the precursor to the guy, he certainly speaks to this feeling in America, especially on the right, that the solution to this problem is probably one of leadership and not one of tweaking our ideology until we get all of the talking points just right.
Yeah, I can kind of feel the Spangler emanating from what you're saying there. Because he does say that Caesarism is a historical necessity. He has a very kind of a mystical and poetic view of history, and like very determinist in the way he views things. But it's like, the civilization, once it gets to its civilizational winter, there has to be a Caesar that comes and kind of ushers it forward into the next stage. Um, and this, I mean, that ties back to a lot of what we've had over this conversation, especially decisiveness. There has to be somebody that's able to make decisions for the country. If we're all caught up in the bureaucracy, then we have serious issues. Um, but one serious issue I want to talk about is immigration, which is very popular on Twitter right now and in the news in general, considering Springfield, Ohio, and what's going on there. Spangler talks about how the non-West seeks revenge on the West after centuries of mistreatment or being left behind. He talks about that at the end of Hour of Decision, that they come and invade afterwards. And in Man and Technics, he talks about the same thing. Like they use the technologies of the West to get revenge on the West. And there's kind of two prongs there. There's the migration, and then there's like the like China, which is non-Western but is now using Western technology to get a one-up on the West. So, what's your take on the immigration crisis in general, and where that's going? How we can deal with that? Do we need zero immigration? What do you think about deportation? What do you think about legal versus illegal immigration? Because I'm anti all immigration, legal or illegal. And Phyllis Schlafly was ahead of the curve on this, like 20 years ago, writing about legal immigration will doom conservatism in America. 20 years ago, she was saying
Yeah,
that. So,
mass legal immigration.
yeah.
That's a big thing. And it's interesting because, like you said, Spangler was worried about these things being picked up by their populations and wielded against the West, but it seems in many ways that the West has decided to almost commit suicide, as James Burnham put it, by kind of kickstarting this process itself, with no real malice necessary from other populations. There's a key thing to understand, that the United States is having a difficult time transitioning to. When we were building this country, it was in many ways many different populations, mainly Anglo, but the other populations were involved as well. And the thing that kind of forged these populations together was our expansion. Right, we had a continent that we were filling. We had many different areas. The frontier spirit, that Western spirit, was the thing that really forged the identity, really created an ethnogenesis in the United States. Initially, was this binding idea that we had to fill this continent, we had to subdue it. There was a manifest destiny. This was a real power. It's mocked today in public education, but this is a real and serious way in which you can bind the people together, and it worked for a long time. We had our regional identities. The life in Philadelphia and life in Georgia were radically different, but they still understood themselves as kind of part of this American experience, and kind of the manifest destiny that was involved. Now that has kind of come to an end, we've reached the frontier. It's over. We've covered the continent. We've expanded into it. There's no longer that idea of kind of the frontiersman. And what we get instead is the immigrant. And a lot of people will just say, oh, well, everyone in the United States is an immigrant. Well, no, actually, becoming a settler, becoming a frontiersman is very different than moving to an established place with an established culture and then suddenly demanding that you get a carve out from it, right? Like there's a difference between saying, I am moving to the West because I want to help forge this. I want to become part of this. I want to, bind with these people and conquer something and create something great. And saying, oh, well, I'm going to move here because there's a bunch of free stuff. Like that is a radically different thing. And so ultimately, I think we're in a scenario where the end of the frontier has really created a moment where America still sees itself as a place where anyone can come and have the American dream and make themselves what they will. The kind of thing that we understood when we had lots of frontier and space for people to expand in and to kind of forge new communities in. But now we have really settled. We are in a different phase of civilization, as you alluded to with Spangler. And that means that we need to adapt, just like we needed to adapt if we, the difference between a republic and an empire. We needed to understand the difference between a frontier culture and one that has settled the continent that it now occupies. And when you make that shift, you may have to make a shift in the way in which you view immigration. And that's really where we are now. As you pointed out, as Schlafly pointed out, legal immigration can be just as damaging to the culture. We should be investing in the people who are here now. We should be taking time to unify the identity of the people we have in the United States now to forge our common bonds together towards the same moral vision. But instead, we are constantly turning over the population. In fact, we have one political party which is basically explicitly involved in porting people solely for the ability to manipulate the democratic mechanism, and another party that doesn't really understand why it might be important to create some level of cultural stability. We have to understand America not as an economic zone, not as a place where anyone can just come and make their fortune, but as a piece, as a people and a place, one with a specific culture, a specific tradition, one that understands where it's going together. And I think that constant immigration destroys our ability to do that.
By the way, I think I would say that at least the outgoing Republican Party leadership, the Chamber of Commerce neocons that have ruled us for 30 to 40 years, they have very purposefully known what they're doing in shipping in H-1B visas and low-income, workers specifically based on that, while outsourcing things overseas. We've been done dirty by both parties, I think, for quite some time, and that's the key, is that Americans are waking up. But this is a big pill for a lot of people to swallow, because altruistically, I think a lot of folks on the right for a long time have said, well, we are a nation of immigrants and freedom. You come here to, assimilate into our ideas. But at the same time now, we're seeing, the radical left, really Marxist factions, have been very purposefully using that against us to filter in and in an unassimilated fashion, essentially bring in the army of voters that just uses the democratic system to flip it on its head, and ultimately get them to a point of just carving out total power for themselves. The total state. It almost sounds like a book we've heard of from a really nice guy. But that's a tough pill for people to swallow. But I like how you put it, shifting from a frontier culture to a, so we're stable, we're here now. How do we continue to invest and grow, but not growing the same way we've always thought, growing the culture stronger and closer together? That's a big one I think people need to understand, and I'm trying to think of how a short version of getting people to see and understand that would hit.
Well, if we can recognize this when it comes to, say, the raising of children, right? If you have a child and they are being properly brought up, and you drop them into a group of 30 kids that are acting badly, that are have different values, they're going to be pulled in that direction, right? Just like if you have, say, a church group and one kid who's from a rough background, but they spend a lot of time around a bunch of kids who all share the same values and understanding, they're more likely to be pulled in that direction. And that's really what we need to understand when it comes to assimilation in the United States. People as far apart as, say, Thomas Sowell and Pat Buchanan have said the same thing. People can become Americans over generations as long as it is done slowly and in small doses, right? When you have a very small amount of people who are not allowed to congregate together, not allowed to create, say, ethnic ghettos or neighborhoods that are completely separated, when you are given generations and generations to assimilate certain people, you can make this change. That can be a real change. But when you are importing large populations of people who have radically different values and they are allowed to settle, as we see in a place like Springfield, Ohio, in a concentration that is 1/3 the size of the current community, that is, that is ethnic cleansing. That is the replacement of the people who live there. And as you pointed out, it is done specifically for the advantage of the ruling elite, who on the left want to gain the electoral advantages of bringing in populations that will be more loyal to them, and on the right for people who want to drive down wages, want to spur the economy, ultimately don't care about the quality of life of the people who live here. We have an issue in the United States when it comes to certain aspects of population, but that issue is that the people here aren't having children. Not that we should import a large amount of other populations to suddenly supercharge the economy and fill in the Ponzi schemes that are our entitlement programs. That is not the solution we are looking for. We should be looking for how to revitalize the people who are here and encourage them, rather than to seek solutions outside of our current civilization by importing people who aren't supposed to be there.
Yeah.
Well, since this has all been just such an exciting and rosy and happy conversation, no, but I mean, you're really, we come down to, we mentioned it at the beginning, but Auron, you have a book, The Total State. I highly recommend folks go and find it. I'll make sure we give you a chance to point people to all of it, because obviously you're host on the Blaze, you've got a Substack, author of this book. I want to make sure we point to that. But I mean, at the end of the whole thing, I just looking over the book, you say the total state is doomed. The state we live in. Why is that? Because that sounds really nice to me, but I have to look around and go, "Are you sure?" Because it sure doesn't look like we're, oh yeah, they're toast soon anyway.
Yeah.
I don't know. It doesn't seem that way. So what's your hope at the end of this that tells you the total state is in fact doomed?
Well, it is doomed, but soon might be a too optimistic a phrase that you added there.
That's
So
fair.
the point I make in the book is that ultimately managerialism is a failure because it demands things of people that simply can't exist. For the same reason that communism failed, and ultimately I believe that liberalism will fail. That these are systems that believe something about the human condition that simply is not true. Managerialism requires the mass man. It requires a man who is devoid of all connections, who is shorn of all roots, who is completely removed from family, from faith, from culture, from the distinctive nature that makes us who we are as people. The things that complete us as people. Aristotle told us that real happiness, real human flourishing comes from pursuing our telos inside a community. The community is what is necessary to complete us, fulfilling that role, understanding ourselves as valuable members of that community. That's what binds us together. That's what creates the polis, and that is what creates happy human beings, flourishing human beings. And managerialism robs us of all of that. It breaks us out of communities, it breaks us out of those bonds, and it tries to standardize us into this mass interchangeable set of widgets that can be moved around whenever the elites would like to produce more or sell more or make something happen. That is what we have to see destroyed, and it is destroying itself. I'm sure you guys have noticed that planes don't really land on time the way they used to, that deliveries don't arrive the way that they used to. We have an entire logistical system based on just-in-time delivery. That is a high skill cap thing that you have to constantly keep operating across a globe in order to get it to continue to function. And as we saw with something like the pandemic, that can very easily be disrupted, especially when you realize that you've outsourced your ability to make things like ventilators or antibiotics, because it's all sitting in China, the very place that created the virus that you're now trying to battle. And so you have this problem where the more we globalize and the more we managerialize, the more fragile our system becomes. It feels more powerful because its reach gets wider and becomes more all-encompassing. But the fragility of the system increases. And I believe ultimately, like the Tower of Babel, that as you build this too high, you eventually create a failure point. Too many failure points. You can swap out all the jingle blocks you want at the bottom and feel like you're getting a taller tower. But at one point, you're going to reach for one that is critical. And when you do, you're going to collapse the entire thing. And that's bad in many instances because a lot of us enjoy the lifestyle that current system provides. Let's be clear. The total state is not just this evil tyrannical thing that came out of nowhere. a lot of us handed our responsibilities, our duties as virtuous individuals to the state in order to avoid raising and educating our children, taking care of our ailing parents, taking care of our cousins or our brothers and sisters who went astray. We pushed these responsibilities onto the state. And now we can't believe that the state has become large and powerful, but of course it has. And so, if we want this thing to come apart, we need to be ready to reabsorb and re-shoulder those responsibilities. And that is a lot for people to bear. We gave it up because it gave us all this free time, all this freedom that we like to think we currently enjoy. But obviously, we realize that there's a cost to this. In exchanging that, yes, we no longer have to bear the cost of our family, our extended relationships, the maintenance of society, but we've also lost control of our own lives. So I do think that this thing is going to come apart because of its fragility. But when it does, if people are not ready to reabsorb and re-shoulder those responsibilities, they'll find themselves wishing that the total state was still around.
Yeah, that's that's a big thought. People are very complacent with what we have, and we like all the goodies we get, but being a strong people that is cohesive and works together requires taking responsibility and working together. Um, yeah, did you have any more questions, or what are you thinking?
I mean, that's honestly, I agree. I don't really have any more questions. I thought it was, I wanted to know what that path forward was. And I appreciate, I mean, that's what I think the summation of your book was. The only way is through. And it's just, we have to slog through it.
Hmm.
My great hope and my one giant question, not for, you, Auron, or you, Mason, or even me, is to everyone else. How much are you willing to take before you finally start to realize and wake up what's going on, and then what you have to do about it? Because I see so many people who are even slightly aware, but they're just too happy to not get involved or too complacent. And I look at it and I think, man, this is, how far are you willing to be pushed?
Hmm.
And how many of you is it going to take to finally say, nope, I'm done with this, we got to go a different direction? That's the part that worries me, but that's not an answer I think that any of us can come up with. So I don't know.
Hmm.
That's my big question, but that's to the American people.
Yeah. Well, Arn, where can everybody find all of your work?
Well, I'm of course on Twitter. Sorry, I refuse to call it X. And Gab,
Yes, me too.
Auron MacIntyre. Got the YouTube channel, and of course the show appears both on Blaze TV and in podcast form, so people can catch it there. And then the Substack and the book, The Total State. You can pick it up Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books a Million. Order it through your own local bookstore.
There you go. The Total State. Auron MacIntyre, we appreciate your time so much and your thoughts, and highly recommend. You're one of our favorite follows as far as what we look and read and everything. I hope that folks will take the opportunity to go and find you as a resource as well. So thank you for your time today. We appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. It's been great talking to you.
Absolutely. All right, folks, hold on for just one moment. We'll be right back because I think we have a couple of things we want to maybe wrap up on the debate and a couple other things last night, but we're going to take a quick break and then we'll be right back. Hang on just a minute. That was a fun conversation.
That was great. Yeah.
That's a good. I like him a lot. He's fun. And
Hmm.
actually, Auron MacIntyre is one of the first. Hey, would you guys have someone or consider having so and so on? So that actually that came up, and that was
We listen to your recommendations.
We do.
So if there's other people you want us to have on the show,
it.
let us know.
It may have taken us a while. I don't remember exactly how long ago that recommendation was.
It was during the Charles Haywood interview.
Was it during the Haywood
Yeah.
interview? Okay, so it's been a little while, but
Yep.
not a ton of time. But yeah, we had, of course, this year, we've been really busy with council and all kinds of other stuff. So I was glad that we could finally get that scheduled and catch up with him. But as far as the rest of everything, kind of stepping out of the philosophical, which I really appreciate his perspective. It's getting, well, I mean, like our whole conversation was, it is harder and harder, it seems, to talk to people about this kind of stuff and get them to listen and understand at a deeper level, have those conversations. But then again, I feel like the conversations are also happening more often. So even though it's harder to get people's attention because of every distraction we have, or even the political bait, the candy that's out there, that everyone just gets wrapped up in the little day-to-day stuff, it is also more people I feel like are engaging. So I am hopeful that we and you and everyone else out here has an opportunity to talk to people more about this and actually get them to understand. But none of that happened 2 nights ago. But what did happen 2 nights ago?
Oh boy, that was kind of a boring debate.
It was.
I mean, there were funny moments.
It had its moments.
It wasn't boring, but I think it was forgettable. I don't think that this is going to go down in history as one of Trump's great debates, which they are really Trump's debates. They really are. He's the through line with all of this. Even the Republican debates that he was not at, those were Trump's debates. Those were debates over, notice me, Donald Trump. Please, Donald Trump, notice me. Please come talk to us. And he didn't. He was haunting them like a ghost. And there's been a lot of takes on the debate. I think, I was telling Ryan about this earlier, that overall, I think Trump was the winner of that debate, not because, if you look at all the different points and who scored points over the other person, it stacks up in one way over another, but because the purpose these debates serve in our media landscape is not to, have a discussion and engage in the marketplace of ideas and come to a unified understanding of the truth. Like, no, that's obviously not the point. That's not what they're trying to do. Excuse me.
Don't die.
The role that these debates play in our media landscape is for, it's what's going to be remembered. We still remember in 2016 the because you'd be in jail moment. What do you remember that Hillary said during that debate? Exactly.
Basically, the only things that I remember from Hillary were her little quips that led to Donald Trump's epic responses.
Exactly.
That's it. It's a good thing that someone with the temperament of Donald Trump isn't president of the United States. Yeah, because you'd be in jail. Like, that's the only reason I remember it is because of what Trump, said.
Yeah, and nothing that Harris said 2 nights ago, I think, is going to be remembered in a month. Like, I barely remember any quips she had, aside from this, like, very annoying nagging, like, I think he's having trouble processing that and stuff like that, like, which I hate, but they're eating the dogs, like that, I've seen that remixed, people are reposting that, it's hilarious.
And so here's what's interesting, and I think this is the dynamic that what you're talking about, because the more that I've been able to chew on and process what went on, like you said, there were no arguments that were made, there was only points that we were trying to score on each other. Frankly, neither one of them did great. Trump got off track, I thought, a few times, and he wasn't nearly as focused and laser connected to the track that he was on like he was in June. Of course, that's what happens when CNN leaves you alone and ABC doesn't. Because why? CNN's job was to let Joe Biden sink himself and let Trump finish him off. It worked. What was ABC's job this week? To prop up Kamala Harris. They did it, and they did it very well, fact-checking Trump over and over again. I told you this week, there is nothing that makes my blood boil and want to throw something at a television screen more than to hear so-called journalists literally not even correct. Well, sir, your record actually says a different, it's not even that, well, that's not correct. That's not happening. Even David Muir, Springfield, Ohio, I've talked to the, to the city manager there, and he didn't confirm that. And it's like, oh, good for you. I saw it on TV, Trump says. And he goes, oh, well, you saw it on TV. Says the TV guy.
Yeah.
It's the most ludicrous, petty, childish stupidity that I've ever seen. I can't believe these people are allowed to run something. That's number one for me. No more journalists, no more of the media class running debates in the political world, period. We should have never done it. We've been doing it since 1960. I'm tired of it. It should be over. But in the rest of the world of what happened, Kamala Harris had a really good night where she performed way above expectations because she didn't just word salad out, tell me you had the questions beforehand without telling me you had the questions beforehand. I believe forever that is in fact what happened because they've been caught doing that before. But she did better than everyone thought. Trump maybe didn't stay as laser focused, but here's the deal. Just like his interviews that Trump has been doing, getting on with all these Gen Z and below streamers and interviews and podcasts.
Gen Z and below?
Yeah, sure.
There's like 5-year-old streamers?
No, hold on, pause. Where does Gen Z cut off and go to Alpha? Because y'all are youngins to me, and I don't know.
Yeah.
Whatever. With all the Gen Z streamers that he's getting on with and podcast hosts, going on Theo Vaughn and Aiden Ross and doing a bunch of this stuff, Trump is entering a cultural territory that we haven't had a major politician do in a long time, and that includes Barack Obama, who had like celebrity fame and that kind of fandom following him. They're trying to mimic it with Biden and Harris. It hasn't really taken on. It's not Obama. Neither one of them are Barack Obama or Michelle Obama, which is why the Obamas are still around and still a political factor in D.C. They're the only ones who've had that. But Trump is achieving that, and to your point from the debate this week, in achieving that Gen Z following, even if they don't necessarily care and they didn't plan on voting for him, they're paying attention to him. And all of like TikTok, the Trump, they're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats. This has turned into a TikTok song that's going viral that people are doing dance moves to. As stupid as that all seems.
Show us.
What?
Show us the dance moves.
I don't know the dance moves
because I haven't even seen this.
I'm an elder millennial, but apparently I'm on the internet more than you. But looking at this, it's like, you know what, even if they're not serious, even if they're not thinking about voting, even if it's just a viral trend and they think they're making fun of it, guess whose name and voice is getting used over and over and over and over on the internet? Even if these folks aren't like going to turn out and vote for Donald Trump, it is demoralizing the Harris campaign. She is not the center of viral media attention. The longer we've gone from Tuesday night's debate, the more I tend to agree with you. Trump absolutely dominated and won the debate because Trump has come away with all of the memorable moments from that coveted young demographic. Because I don't know, what do they typically divide, like 18 to 34? I think it's 18 to 34 and then like 35 to, I forget where the next one is, 35 to 55 or something.
Yeah.
I don't know how the political breaks down, but that 18 to 34, Trump is the guy who for the last 48 hours has just been viral across the place, and rightfully so, because he said the most memorable things. And even though Kamala performed way better than expectations, no one in that 18 to 34 is talking about her, positive or negative.
Yeah.
And I'm not just saying the all press is good press, but I mean,
well, one of my friends who does have TikTok said that he saw that Trump's closing statement had 1.1 million likes on TikTok, which that's nothing to scoff at.
No, it's not. And this is where I'm annoyed by some of the terrible voices out there on the internet, like the Tate brothers and everything else, because again, they're absolutely giving not the correct answer, but they are diagnosing correctly a problem and what the problem is, or often what the problem is. And those folks have at least gotten a lot of the young internet-based crowd, not based, internet-based. There's a hyphen in there. They've gotten a lot of the young internet folks to stop and go, well, wait a minute. You know, these people on the left, you know, if I'm fighting the man,
they're lying to me.
These are the man.
Yeah.
This is the man, and they're lying to me. These are the establishment.
The DMV-ification of DMV-ification of America. Like I said, like nobody likes the DMV, but that's what the left is. Like Kamala Harris is a DMV lady. So if like you want to be if you want your country to be run by the DMV lady who makes you jump through these hoops so you can drive on the roads, vote Harris. I saw a post on X. If you really liked your middle school vice principal, boy, do I have a candidate for you.
Oh, man. It's harsh, but it's true.
It's true.
Harsh, but it's true. That's great. That's that. Well, I see over here someone on Rumble piped in at the end. I didn't catch it until after we were off with Auron, but said something about it. So it's not just westward expansion that forged America, but also a set of values that inspired the movement. Civics education is necessary, not only for applying citizens, but legacy citizens as well. I 100% agree. And I know that we were having that conversation about, specifically you talk about westward expansion, not so much that this gave us our ideology of who we were as a people, but this was kind of our mode of operation, our strategy for how we're bringing people in and immigration and accepting and growing the population because we were filling the continent. But truly, this point, I think, exists above all. If we want to have a path back to where we were, or back toward the Constitution, start marching a new direction. I say it's not back. We have to turn to the Constitution. It's really not a matter of turning back. It's turning the right direction. We could just sit and try to convince people of the total state and authoritarianism not being terrible, but tyranny is where we are. And we could try to have all these conversations. If we can just go back and start teaching people Civics 101 in America, I think that could do that would be a huge benefit to us, because that Civics 101, to our commenter's point, civics education would really start to, I think, get people to go, wait a minute. But then if all this, which seems basic and not super political, this is just American civics, then that means over here in politics, what I want to see or what this is, like this is actually a really good, I hate to say a gateway drug to the rest of what we're talking about, but that really is a way, and it's normal in society to have civics education. Maybe the younger generations under me don't remember that, but even it was even gone during my time.
Yeah.
I didn't hear about it a lot.
Yeah, I think civics plus history, like actual honest history, not like we're going to teach you about slavery for the entire year, but like we're going to teach you about the whole thing. We're going to teach you about the the progression of all these different ideas and values and the people that held them and how these progressed from and I don't use progress as like a positive thing, but just how things changed since the American founding and like what shifted during the Civil War, what shifted during the the World Wars and the New Deal. How has everything changed? What's become different? And if you have like a honest perspective of the history of America coupled with a civics education, like that's what makes for a good citizen. That's what makes for you knowing the context of the world you live in. And people just don't know that anymore. They're like, oh, Kim Kardashian, like that has nothing to do with the context of the world that we're in. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that's all I got.
That's all I've got. We had our big conversation. I just wanted to make sure we touched on the debate because it's not all doom and gloom, and neither did Donald Trump just run away with it. It's a little bit of a mix to look at, but I think there's something that transcends just the pure political. You and I always watch debates, and we know about these things. I think there is a generational gap that I'm not really in tune with because I'm not on TikTok, but thankfully a lot of other people are, and those people are on Twitter where I am, and I get to see it all happen. And now I feel the complete freedom because Auron MacIntyre tells me so that I don't have to call it X, and I can just stick with Twitter, and I'm going to do that.
I'm going to call it X.
Good for you.
I like Elon.
You zoomer. Anyway.
We're going to Mars.
We're going to Mars. You're not wrong. All right, thank you to our sponsor, T-Rex Inc. They are awesome. You have an awesome code. Go to trexinc.com. Use your promo code CAUCUS30 for the biggest bigly discount that will supersede all other discounts, unlike anything you've ever seen. Trust us. We've talked to people. It's true. They say it. We say it. It's just how
Everybody's
it is.
saying it. I wore my T-Rex Inc. shirt to the gym this morning.
Did you get any looks?
The Trump 2024 tank top. No, I didn't. I was alone in the gym, so.
Oh, well, then that, yeah.
No looks, but.
Is the gym your house? Be honest.
No.
Okay, good. Because I think a lot of people say that, and I'm like, walking to the kitchen doesn't mean you exercised. I'll continue to maybe say that, but it's not true. No, I'm kidding. But go on over, show some love for T-Rex Inc. Thank them for being our sponsor, and buy some cool stuff while you're there. I still, like I said, I've got a hat and some other stuff I need to look into. Hoodies. They have hoodies. And it's starting to get just a touch cooler.
These mornings, they're pretty chilly.
I
might need a T-Rex Inc. hoodie to,
you might.
when I go out in the morning.
You could get your Facts Don't Care About Your Feelings hoodie and try to get Ben Shapiro to sign it at some point for you. Dr. Dreidel, the one-hit wonder.
Dr. Dreidel.
Dr. Dreidel. But I think that's it. Thanks for being with us.
Caucus time is over.
Caucus time is over. Go to unauthorizedcaucus.com. You'll get there to our Substack. Make sure you sign up to subscribe if you haven't already, because we are launching into all kinds of new stuff, including chat threads and different things. We're going to move into
there's a chat as of today.
Yeah, got a chat thread open.
You can talk to us in the Unauthorized Caucus Substack chat. If you're a subscriber there, you can chat away. All you need is a Substack account.
That's right. And then from there, it'll spiderweb into everything else. So subscribe to us on Rumble. There is an obligatory YouTube channel. And then, of course, you can find us on all the socials, on Twitter, on Facebook, and on Truth Social. And then you can find each of us on Twitter. And are you on Truth Social?
Nope.
Nope. Okay.
You can find me on x.com.
Yes, and you can find me at twitter.com, which still goes to the same place. But I think that's all we've got for you today. So, folks, we appreciate you. And as always, we will talk to you next Thursday. Oh, by the way, podcast goes live tomorrow. For those of you who are listening, you know how that works. It's on Friday. But otherwise, for everyone else live, we will see you next Thursday at noon. It will be caucus time. You made me do that.
Bye.